Welcome to this week's episode of the Founder and the Force Multiplier podcast, where we explore how founders and leaders work together with their right-hand partners to turn ideas into action and build wildly successful businesses. Today, I'm speaking with David Nebinski and Rahul Desai from the Chief of Staff Network. Rahul is the general manager of the Chief of Staff and Biz Ops networks. Previously, he worked in Chief of Staff and Biz Ops roles in the insurance tech industry and served as a product strategy consultant to household names including Google and Uber. David is the Community Operations Manager for the Chief of Staff Network and Biz Ops Network, and the host of the 250 plus episode Portfolio Career podcast. Previously, David worked directly with Chris Shembra, USA Today's Gratitude Guru at the 747 Club, and with Lisa Carmen Wong. I had an awesome time chatting with David and Rahul about the Chief of Staff role, the skills needed to succeed in this position, and what the future of the Chief of Staff role looks like. Don't forget to check out the show notes for their free Chief of Staff compensation report, as well as a 15% discount on an annual membership to the Chief of Staff Network. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I think you will, then be sure to let us know in all the usual places, such as leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening to this episode. Hello, thank you so much for joining me today for the Founder and the Force Multiplier podcast. Welcome.
Really excited to be here.
We're so excited about here.
Awesome. Well, I love to just get right into things and get started. So for those of our listeners who aren't familiar with the Chief of Staff Network, could you tell me a little bit or tell us a little bit about how that got started and then a little bit about your individual roles in the organization?
Yeah. David, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Well, first, Hallie, thanks so much for having us. Such an honor. I am a fan of podcasts, and I'm honored to be on this podcast. And so when I joined the Chief of Staff Network in August of 2021, it had already been an existing community. So I can't, I'm hearing a little bit of this is what I learned through the founder, Scott Amenta. But in 2016, Scott published a blog post on Medium titled Chief of Staff, a Critical Role Among High Growth Startups. And a couple months before, Scott had started to be he kind of promoted his role internally at Spring to become a Chief of Staff. So he was a brand new Chief of Staff here in New York and published this blog post. And I think over 400 claps. I guess that's the kind of the equivalent of the like button. But as you can tell, just a lot of popularity and a lot of interest around this blog post. And then just a handful of months later, he started the Chief of Staff Network because people started responding to this newsletter, to this blog post, saying like, "Oh my gosh, this is so interesting," and thanks for articulating the role. And for Scott, again, I'm kind of speaking for him, so I hope I don't get it wrong, but basically was like, he was new to the role, didn't know anybody else internally, and was kind of working with the CEO, but didn't really have a team. So he kind of published this blog post as a little bit of like a, kind of a bat signal out there to say who else is out there that does this kind of work. And after that blog post, and a little bit later, as I mentioned, the Chief of Staff Network started in January 2017 officially. And then people started gathering first in person in New York. And then slowly but surely, the community has grown more and more to a global community. And I'm here in New York, and we're getting back to some of those in-person event roots. And Rahul, anything you want to add on that part?
Yeah, the growth has been amazing. I think a lot of it happened through the pandemic when people were especially hungry for that connection. We couldn't leave our houses or go to work or anything like that. And I've been also impressed to see that now that we're sort of coming back to the normal way of doing things, our growth is still unabated. Like, we're getting new members all the time. I think we're about to cross 700 probably in the next coming weeks. So overall, I like to characterize the Chief of Staff Network is the home for chiefs of staff and people doing chief of staff type work on the internet. Because so frequently you are the only one at your company or in your group of companies. And often you can't talk to people about what you're working on because it's confidential or it's HR related or whatever. And I find that when people come to us, they have this home where, no one's going to judge them. No one's going to think their question is stupid. No one's going to violate their trust. And really, ultimately, that's what we're all about. The long and short of it is we're a peer support group for chiefs of staff.
Yeah, I love that. And as a member of the Chief of Staff Network, I certainly enjoy it as a resource. It's been really valuable to me as well.
Thank you. How'd you stumble across us? Maybe we can, turn the tables. You got to be careful with the podcaster over here asking questions to the podcaster.
I love it. I don't remember, but it may have, quite honestly, it may have been that initial article, and then I may have just started following Scott, or that's all I can think. That's what I can think of most clearly, as I'm sure I followed him on LinkedIn and then just kept an eye on what he was doing. That was around the time, probably 2014, 2015, 2016 was when I was starting to really explore the chief of staff role, and I was having a very hard time finding resources on it outside of the government. So I read a bunch of white papers in relation to the government's role, the chief of staff role, but there was very little either in the startup world or the entrepreneurship space or in the corporate world. So, I was trying to get my hands on anything I could find. I'm sure one of his article was one of them. And then the rest is history from there.
Love it.
Well, as a chief of staff, I always like to know from chief of staff experts, what is the most frequent question that you get about the chief of staff role?
The one that I get, which may be different from what David hears, is almost always, how do I become a chief of staff? And so we get tons of inbound from people who are aspiring into the role and they're not necessarily in it yet. And typically, especially these days, given what's going on with the broader economy, my advice is you want to demonstrate a lot of commercial rigor. So where did you drive revenue or decrease cost, either directly or indirectly? Because everyone has become so cost and profit conscious lately. And then the second thing is, what's your evidence of systems thinking, right? What have you implemented to either scale your manager, whether that is a principal relationship like it is in the chief of staff role, or just your manager in a typical role? Or how have you brought systems to scale your company if you don't have that kind of a relationship with your manager? And so that's typically the advice I give to people who are aspiring into the role. And I imagine David has some advice for folks who are in the role already, given that he teaches some of our classes that cater to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to just kind of quickly answer the question. I think one of the common questions that I get is more around the relationship building between the chief of staff and the principal. So how to improve communication, how to improve the relationship. I wish I had a magic formula for that, but I would say it's just more around kind of over communicating, evolving, adapting, trying different things, try to meet in person, change up different ways to, show progress, close the loop on things. And I think that's some of the main conversations I have is around that, kind of casually, the one-on-one conversations, and then separate from the learning and development programs that Rahul was talking about, which we can dive into those later if you'd like. But that's probably one of the main questions I get is around relationship building.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. Oh, what are you seeing in terms of like patterns or trends from what positions people are coming from going into a chief of staff role? Are you seeing any sort of commonalities there?
Yeah, I can start here. So we're starting to see a couple of different archetypes. We've got your typical folks from professional services. They come out of consulting or banking. I think that's been a very common archetype since the community started. What we're seeing more and more of, which is frankly very exciting to me, is the transition of EAs who've become very strategic over the course of their career, finally earning that chief of staff title and getting that commensurate bump in pay, respect, all of that. We've brought on, I think, probably 10 members in the last month who are in that boat. And that's really, really exciting to see. And then we've got people who are internal promotes, right? They were an ops manager or, some sort of junior to mid-level person, but they've got a lot of horsepower. And their principal realizes, wait, I can use this person so much more effectively. It's like, they realize, oh, this person is actually going to magnify my capacity 1.5x, 2x. And people often fall into it that way as well.
Yeah, super cool.
The only thing that I would add is I would say a lot of times there's a story. And, It might be a relationship. It might be, something really unique about somebody that really brings a certain type of background or skill set or hunger for the role. And so for the person that's listening here that is thinking about becoming a chief of staff, or I would say just lean into your strengths, lean into your story, craft your message, reach out to people. And you might be surprised. Don't ever kind of disqualify yourself before you even get, kind of started or even having those initial conversations. So lean into your strengths and reach out to people, and good things can happen.
I really, of course, particularly liked that you mentioned the executive assistant path to chief of staff. That was my personal path, and one I speak to often. And I also love the leveling framework that you have on your website. I refer to that often. I recommend that often. And so I'm curious, where would you say like an EA maybe falls within that leveling framework? Do they come before that level 1 associate chief of staff? And maybe just talk to me about how you think of those levels and where an executive assistant might fit in.
David, you want to go ahead? Yeah, sure. I'll start, and then David, you can come in. I frankly think there is not necessarily very much of a difference between an L1 chief of staff and an EA. If you look at the framework, it really is a lot about time management, sort of the small tasks that are not necessarily very strategic or driving the direction of the company, but it's stuff that, like the metaphor we can use is plaque in your teeth. It's something that just builds up over the course of time and you want to get rid of it. And so often the L1 chief of staff is the person for the CEO who deals with that plaque. And so, that could be an EA. And often we see some EAs doing this kind of work. What we typically see in our community, though, is that the members are like that level 3 or above. That's what I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that's good to know. Are you seeing any trends in terms of are chiefs of staff tending to stay in the role a certain number of years at this point? Are you seeing them be these lifelong chiefs of staff, or they rotate, or are they rotating out of the position, and where are they going when they do rotate out?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. I was actually chatting about this with someone earlier today. So very timely question. What we've seen and sort of the common knowledge, received wisdom in this space is typically it's a tour of duty that lasts 18 to 36 months. Often, especially at high growth startups, it can be a role that induces a lot of burnout for people. And so I think that speaks to why the tenure is fairly reduced. There are folks certainly who become lifers for their particular principal. They've got an amazing relationship. It's something special and unique, and they want to be with that person for a really long time. And I've seen examples of this. But I would say that the more common case is probably that 1.5 to 3 year tour of duty. And typically we see probably 3 or 4 cases occurring. One is you graduate the role at your company and step into something more senior, whether that be, head of ops or head of people or something like that, whatever speaks to your strengths. We've seen people keep that chief of staff role at a separate company. Maybe you want to change the size of your company or the industry or the stage, but you really like that chief of staff work. We've seen the example of people graduating the role and getting this more senior position at a different company. And then we've seen people leave the chief of staff role and they've learned so much about being a CEO or a founder or another form of executive that they go found something of their own. David, do you think I hit all the cases, or is there anything else that I've missed?
I think you hit everything. I'd love to hear, Hallie, is there anything else that you'd like to point out on that part, or trends that you're seeing? We only see our kind of corner of the world, but would love to hear how you see things too.
Yeah, that sounds right in line with what I'm hearing and seeing as well. And you talked about the lifer. Obviously, I'm kind of a lifer. I've been working with Adam for 12 years, and probably will continue to do so for a while. So I actually, and it could be because I kind of work in that very entrepreneurial EA chief of staff space, where it's very often that the founder's first hire, and they do end up working with them for a long time. I've got many of those force multipliers who've been working with their principals for 10 years, 12 years, 8 years, 15 years. So I see a lot of that, but I do think that's probably just because that's kind of the niche I'm in. But I always think it's fascinating too when they move on and to start their own companies. That is always very exciting.
Yeah, we definitely see a lot of we see a fair amount of lifers as well, and people that really are trying to lean on the community as well to continue to kind of advocate for the role and continue to share the great work and share how it can be more than the 18 to 36 months. And I think that what people really like is they really like doing the certain type of work, and they'd like to see that expand. And obviously companies evolve and stuff. And so sometimes there might not be the right, fit internally as much, but I think generally it's people really like this type of work and they'd like to do it more. And hopefully that can happen in their current role. But what also happens is like chiefs of staff kind of know what other chiefs of staff do. And so there's a certain level of respect. There's a certain level of camaraderie. There's a certain level of like, we've been in the trenches together. And so I think that they also like to see other people find other similar types of roles. And so I think that's just really cool to watch as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even though I've been in a chief of staff role for who knows how many years, 7, 8, 9, I don't even know at this point. There's just so much. I feel like there's still so much to learn, and with chief of staff role looks a little bit different working for a high growth startup versus working with a more a company that's been around for a really long time. They're working with the COO or even just working one-on-one with the principal like I do. It's just always fascinating, and there's so many new tools and frameworks, and I love hearing all the different frameworks that chiefs of staff and often I see them in the network. That's where I find all these very interesting like decision-making models and different thinking frameworks and business planning frameworks. And I think that stuff is very, very helpful and very interesting.
I think that's really interesting. I talked about how the 7 or 8 years and how there's still so much to learn. Could you maybe speak to a little bit more about how, what are, you said like tools and frameworks and stuff, but would love to hear more to maybe that person that's out there that's like, I'm worried that after 18 months, I might feel things are repetitive or not. But I think your story is really fascinating and interesting. And I think listeners would love to hear more about it.
Yeah. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I work with a multi-passionate serial entrepreneur. So every year for 10 years, we've started a new project and or a new company. So there's always something new to learn, whether it's a new industry, whether it's a new leadership team, and then of course all the companies are at different stages. So one of our companies is almost 12 years old. That organization requires much different level of structure, cadences of communication. It's a much larger team, and being able to, considering I've been completely self-taught in this role, it's very helpful for me to see what do other organizations of that size do to make sure that the leadership team is staying cohesive, that the communication is working really well, versus one of our other organizations where it might be a team of 2. Well, I've done that for many, many years, so I can kind of handle that. But as the company grows and evolves, like we need different structure, we need different systems in place to handle the growth. And really, in my role, a lot of this is to handle the interpersonal dynamics and to handle the communication flow and the decision-making models and frameworks at a different level.
Love it. Yeah, so interesting. I think you really pointed out there, like that principle can lead to a lot of opportunities currently, like you can grow with that principle. And I think the partnership, the mentorship, the collaboration that happens, I think is really, really unique between a chief of staff and a principal. And it's just like, especially in a world where everyone wants mentorship, I think it's, inherent to the role. And what also is really cool is how, you're really a living testament of where that relationship can go. And I think that's another thing that that chiefs of staff think about is like, all right, who's this principal that I'm working with? And, maybe we do the 18 months together, but then maybe we start a company together, or we incubate a company together, or that person introduces me to another CEO who needs another chief of staff. And so I think it's a really unique role, a rocket ship type of role, an apprenticeship type of role that, doesn't always sometimes you can't connect the dots immediately of like where this like intense work will take a person, but like it's really cool to hear about how all these different businesses that you're starting, and we hear stories about that as well from other community members that that their principal opened up doors for them.
Yeah, and and not all chiefs of staff are like this, but I'm definitely an entrepreneur. And so I think that is why the chief of staff role is so great for me and for other entrepreneurs, because I get to flex that entrepreneurial muscle constantly. But at the end of the day, I don't have to take the ultimate risk with the ultimate decision risk or the ultimate financial risk, which is much more in alignment with my natural behavior. And there's probably a lot of chiefs of staff who are like that too. So I'm an entrepreneur, and I'm very thankful that I get to work with somebody as visionary as Adam is, so that I can have all of the fun without some of the risk.
Yeah, great combination.
Yeah, for sure. So speaking a little bit about the role, are you seeing any other trends? I mean, obviously the chief of staff role is like this really popular role right now and has been, I don't know, for the past 5-8 years, and it just seems to be increasing in popularity. Do you think that that's going to tap out at some point? Do you think we're going to see, the amount of chiefs of staff kind of shrink or reformat? Like, where do you see that going?
So, really good question. I think, what we've seen in the last couple of months is these sweeping layoffs, especially in the tech industry, and certainly some of our members and people in our broader community have gotten swept up there. But on the flip side, we're still seeing very strong demand for chief of staff roles, really in all sectors, but especially in like Series A to C SaaS companies. But I've also seen roles in health, finance, agriculture recently, all sorts of different places. And I really do think we're going to continue to see this role grow in prominence. We've gotten people applying to join the community from Rwanda and Singapore and India and all these places where, just like the role didn't exist in the US a few years ago, these roles didn't exist in those places like last year. Right. And so I really think that it will be here for the long haul. I'm not going to say forever, because I don't think anything is immortal in our society, but I don't think there's any reason to worry that this role is going to evaporate overnight.
Yeah, the other, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I agree. I'm seeing that too. We have a decent sized audience in, Europe and Australia, and they're like, chief of staff role doesn't really exist there, but it's kind of starting. I'm like, great, this is an awesome opportunity to get that, get the name out for the chief of staff role even more. So to your point, I don't think it's going away either. And I don't think the generalist, like the whole concept of like generalist roles, which I believe oftentimes chief of staff falls into, I think those generalist roles are becoming more, whatever the title may be, are becoming more popular too, because we need individuals in our organizations who are flexible, who are mentally agile, who can fill in the gaps, who can connect dots across the organization, and maybe aren't so narrowly focused. Anyway, that's just my opinion.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, it's cool to hear that you've also talked to some of these people that are the early adopters or the trendsetters in these different parts of the world. I think it's so cool. I try to communicate that to them when they're in Singapore, they're in France, or they're in Australia or Sydney, which those places there are chiefs of staff, but not as maybe as critical as there is in New York. But like, to me, I try to I can see it in them and I can feel it in them, or they're like, something's happening here. And I'm like, I know, I can hear it in you. And, I kind of like to give the analogy of so here in New York, last week we hosted our second chief of staff summit. It's kind of like a mini conference and unconference kind of thing. I'm biased, but it was a great time. We can talk about that more. But I didn't make
it. I was in California.
I know you almost came to the last one too. But I'm drawing the analogy of that. Why I think that event and the past two events have gone so well is that, there has been this track record of chiefs of staff in New York, but there's also been the track record of chiefs of staff in New York getting together. So when I joined the Chief of Staff Network in August 2021, I would say I've hosted 6 to 7, maybe 8 kind of formal coffee chats, happy hours, mingles, all these different, and sometimes, it'd be 4 people, sometimes it'd be 6 people, sometimes it'd be 10. And it slowly started to build up to this momentum. And then we did this kind of like bigger event, and then people kind of all kind of came out for that. And so to that chief of staff that's in Paris, I'm just going to say Paris, who only knows a couple of chiefs of staff right now, I bet that in a year from now, it'll be different. And it'll be similar to the way that the kind of events have been happening here in New York, where it started off as maybe a little bit of a trickle, and then, the momentum starts to build. So I love talking to those people. I think how the chief of staff role is unique in those markets, but also has similarities kind of globally, I think is just so fascinating. And we can't wait to eventually share more and more of those kind of stories and the similarities and the differences and stuff like that. Rahul's looking at me now. He's like, sounds good, man. Looks like you just crafted up a task for you. I'm going to check my Asana after this, and there's going to be something in my inbox. But, and then the only other thing I was going to say about the role and the trends there, I think like my non-traditional chief of staff like roles, 2 of which that I'm thinking about right now, they came from relationships, and they also came from like me reaching out to people and sharing ideas and trying to add value. And I think like that's available to many people, and you don't really need as much like permission for that. And I think like I don't know the percentages on like how many chiefs of staff get hired based upon the percentage of the roles that are posted, but like the last 2 chief of staff like roles that I had, there was no job posts. Mm-hmm. They just kind of came from me kind of making something happen. I hate to sound cocky, but and so I think like, every business owner, every founder like wants to grow the business. And so if you're listening to this and you're saying, I want to have a chief of staff role, I think you can try to like find ways to like make it. And it may start off as like a 1-week project or a weekend project. And that's okay. But I think like you want to prove that you can, how you work, the value that you can create. And I think people love seeing that. And so don't kind of wait for a posting as much, if to the degree that you can. If you see a company that you're really excited about, maybe you have some inside information about like where the trends are in the industry, what their customers are saying. And if you want to like, summarize that or come up with some new ideas on how the product may change, et cetera, and communicate that to the founder, I can imagine a founder will reply to that email more so than can I pick your brain? 100%. Go for it.
I personally hate those pick your brain emails. I'm like, no, you can't. I love what you mentioned there, because I completely agree that so many of the chief of staff roles can be created. I created my own. I basically just proposed it and said, this is what I'm doing, and this is where I want to go in my career. Does this work for you? And the answer was yes. And I absolutely encourage people to do the same, whether it's in their own organization, because they already have that relationship with their principal. So why not at least attempt to move into that role in your current company? And if that isn't an option, to your point, email a founder, email a company that you're really excited about, and propose the role, and make sure that you're sharing the value and benefits that you can bring and impact that you will make along the way. Okay, I've got to ask you, what do you think are the 3 most important skills, top 3 skills of a highly effective chief of staff?
I can start here, and I think I probably have different answers than David does.
Okay, good.
That might be fun. For me, I think the first thing, like I was mentioning previously, is this idea of systems development. Like an okay chief of staff will listen to their executive and say, oh, you need this task done? All right, I'll go do it. An excellent chief of staff looks at that request and says, oh, you need this task done? I'll build you a system or implement a tool or do something that handles it forever. Right? Because ultimately that's commercial rigor, right? It's driving cost out of your business, making things faster. It's improving the efficacy of your teammates. I think the second thing is being a culture champion. Often the thing about the CEO is that they're scary, even if they don't mean to be. In our society and a lot of other different cultures and societies, we're told to hold leadership at sort of an arm's length, and they stand apart. And the chief of staff is a nice way that you can have access to leadership without it seeming scary or aloof or apart. And so what I've seen from these great chiefs of staff is that they're really culture champions. They're trying to live those values every single day. They're making them accessible to the team. They're out there taking praise, complaints, whatever the company needs to get off their chest as a collective group. And then the last thing is probably generating alignment, right? Often, especially as companies scale, there's so many projects happening all at once. It gets very difficult to track all of those. The CEO can't keep up with them all. The various executives and even middle managers sometimes can't keep up. And the best chief of staffs I've ever seen have figured out, how do I understand what's going on? Like, what's the map? What's the lay of the land? And how do I disseminate the pieces that everyone needs such that they can keep moving forward in a timely fashion? And frankly, that's a skill that when I was a chief of staff, I was quite bad at. So it's been really gratifying to see people who are exceptional at it in the community.
Yeah, I love that. Did you add any, David, anything?
I think it's hard to pick three. And I also think, it's hard to speak for people. I think, to your point, a lot about, like, I was thinking a lot about, what does the word effective mean? And that can change by the day, right? And that can change by the week, and especially with business cycles and conditions evolving. And I think, like, I wish that I could give a skill to say, hey, double down on this and whatnot. But I would say, like, I think that they, from where I sit, like, are being very effective. And so just kind of continue to do the stuff that you're doing. And I know that people are doing the best that they can, and it's a challenging time. And, from every different, like, big macro policy and narrative that happens, from a return to office, great resignation, like, just all the stuff that is, that is happening. It seems like people are really adapting. So maybe it's adaptability as a skill, and, while trying to be that force multiplier of whatever that means that day. So I don't know. People are just doing incredible work. And I know that Rahul and I just see, like, a teeny fraction of stuff. So it's just really cool to see, hear a little bit about what people are up to. And whenever we get together, it's just so interesting of, like, I'm like, you did tell me about that. I didn't know that was happening. I didn't know that you did that. Like, and they're like, yeah, of course. Like, so it's a real, like, people are just doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes.
Yeah, I love that. Do you have any like book or podcast that are that's your go-to recommendation for people interested in about the chief of staff role or developing their career in general?
This is not necessarily chief of staff focused, but a pod I like a lot is called Invest Like the Best. And it's sort of a general survey of business topics with people who are very prominent across all sorts of different industries. And an episode that stands out to me was one on the topic of focus, and how most people these days try and take on too much. We're juggling all these things at once. And the speaker was a former executive at Instacart who's now moved on to be a venture capitalist. And he was basically saying, like, actually, you should only be doing one or maybe two things at a time. If you do that, you'll both have higher quality and go faster. And so the podcast is, they've got a lot of quality speakers, and there's a lot of those little lessons you can take away. So that's one that I like.
That's awesome. I haven't heard of that one, so it's going on the list. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm a little biased. I have a podcast. It's called the Portfolio Career Podcast. So a quick little plug there. 250 plus episodes. Check that out. There's a couple with a couple of chiefs of staff as well. But I think if I had to pick another show, I really like the show. It's called The Long and the Short of It. It's by Pete Shepard and Jen Waldman. And what I really like about that show is they are picking quick topics, and that topic might be empathy. That topic may be leadership. That may be return to office, and maybe fatigue and maybe burnout, but just the way that they have this kind of casual conversation going deep on like a word sometimes makes me really think about like and seeing their relationship and how it evolves and how they kind of mirror one and reflect each other and stuff like that. It kind of reminds me a lot of kind of like the depths of relationship and partnership between a chief of staff and a principal. So I don't know, and they're awesome people. So it's just like fun to hear cool people talk about interesting and relevant ideas to the work world.
Very cool. What are you both working on next, or what is the Chief of Staff Network working on next?
Rahul?
Sure. Yeah. So I think what's interesting about our relationship is that David and I focus on completely different things day to day, and often we can go a week without having a physical meeting to talk to each other. And my focus is really on admissions, member growth, sort of the commercial aspects of the business. And David is much more focused on events, programming, member experience. I'll let him speak to his piece because there's a lot of cool stuff coming down the pipe. But on my side, we're really focused on how do we grow our membership in a way that keeps the community's energy alive and is authentic to the members that we already have. And, I'm really excited that last month was our biggest month of growth ever, and people seem more active and excited than they have in the past. And, all of that ties into this flywheel of member experience and events and stuff like that. So I will let David take over from here.
Sure. So I would say, a lot of the stuff that we both focus on still connects to what I call kind of like the 3 C's of what the Chief of Staff Network really kind of provides for members, which is cohorts, curriculum, and community, and how those are kind of manifested and kind of evolves by the day. But I just want to reiterate of like how we really focus on these 3 C's, cohorts, curriculum, and community. And I'm biased again, but I'm really kind of still buzzing from the energy of this Chief of Staff Summit that we had in New York a week ago. And so, yeah, just really, at the end of it, a lot of people are asking about what's next. And so looking forward to doing, similar types of events in New York and hopefully other places as well. We have, ongoing fundamentals track, which is a program that's really focused on helping new chiefs of staff get up to speed. Hallie, you talked a lot about how you were self-taught and how you had to figure things out on your own. We've taken a lot of those kind of best practices and those lessons learned from experienced chiefs of staff and really kind of distilled that into a 6-week program for new chiefs of staff to get up to speed. Because a lot of times we hear that chiefs of staff just started the role, have never done the role before, and the principal that they're working with has never had a chief of staff before. So the fundamentals track is really focused on, helping that solve that problem with a group of other dozens of other chiefs of staff. And we're also in the middle of a program called the Chief of Staff Leadership Accelerator, which is helping chiefs of staff around that 6 to 12 months mark that are looking to really level up even more, or looking to help grow the business more and more, take on strategic projects, really be that force multiplier after kind of getting up to speed through the fundamentals and in the role. So really excited about that. And, we got a couple other things that we're working on. Rahul's probably like, David, don't say that, don't say that, don't say that. It's not ready yet. Don't roll it out. But we got a lot of great stuff coming, and we're really excited about what's ahead. And yeah.
That's awesome. Very, very, very cool stuff. I love the 3 C's. That's great. Cool. Well, thank you both so much for hanging with me today and sharing all about all things Chief of Staff. Definitely one of my favorite topics.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a blast.